Welcome to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Private School Teachers. And my name is Minkus, and I'm looking forward to hang out with you for a little while today to talk about something really important. And you're going to see, hopefully, as we go through these 7 habits based on the book by Stephen Covey, that if you apply these to your life, if you apply these to your school year, that it will change your school year and it will change your life, even if you adopt just one of these habits. So let's jump right into it. So I know that most of you watching this video probably know what this is. It's a rotary telephone. And I wonder how many of you, though, know who this guy is. His name is George Miller. And the reason that George Miller is important and has anything to do with a telephone is because back in the 1950s, George Miller was doing work on working memory and how many things you could hold in your mind at a given time. Around that time, as we know, the end of World War II, the baby boom, and the population explosion in the United States. And so Ma Bell, or the Bell Telephone Company, as it was known at that time, they ran out of phone numbers. They started running out of phone numbers. And so they asked George Miller, how many digits can we put in a phone number? What's the maximum number of digits? And through his research on working memory, he came up with the number 7, the magic number 7. And you might be able to remember your phone number from before area codes and before the recent explosion in the need for phone numbers. But what we're going to do today is make sure that you understand that this book written by Stephen Covey, 15 million copies sold, international bestseller, you don't need to read the book, but you need to know the habits. And as I said before, it's going to change your school year. It's going to change your life. And hopefully by the end of this, you will realize that you need to start prioritizing your self-care and your state of mind above all of the things that you do every single day. And so as we jump into the 7 habits of highly effective teachers, I just want you to make sure that you have your guided notes. You should have those printed out, hopefully PDF, and you don't have to furiously take notes as you go along in the webinar, but hopefully you can jot down a few things, and all of the blanks that are on your guided notes will be revealed on the screen as we go. So let's get into it. Habit number 1, be proactive. So I'm from Western Pennsylvania, and we have winter, we have summer, we have pothole season, and we have football season. But one of the things that happens around here is that people like to complain about the weather, complain about the weather, whether it's too hot or too cold, or complain about the potholes. Also complain if your favorite football team doesn't make the playoffs or win the Super Bowl every single year. But there's a quote that I want to share with you by Viktor Frankl, and it says, between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And Viktor Frankl wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And some of you may know that Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor from Auschwitz, the concentration camp, and later became a psychologist and did a bunch of research on just how the human mind can withstand trauma. And in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, now that I've given the context of him as a Holocaust survivor, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And so I want you to think about whether or not you are a person that life happens to you and you complain about the things that happen to you, or if things happen and then you choose your response to what happens. And so the difference between proactive and reactive people as you can see here, is that reactive people are driven by their feelings, their circumstances, and things that happen in their environment around them. But proactive people are driven by their values. So let's say, for example, that a reactive person, it's a Friday afternoon, it's the end of a long week at school, the kids are wound up because it's nice weather outside, and a student comes up and comes to the desk and asks a question. Well, it might be that we are not as patient as we could be with that student. We might be short-tempered with them because of all of the circumstances that led to how we're feeling in that moment. But our values are to prioritize the child, to love the child, keep them emotionally and physically safe. And so if we're being proactive, then the way that we interact with that child, even if it's the end of a long week on a Friday afternoon and the kids are wound up and that child's getting on our last nerve, is that we're going to really, really try to be proactive. So things don't happen to us and we have no control over it, but things happen and then we choose our response. Just like Viktor Frankl said, that between stimulus and response, there's a space. And so I wanted to think this through with you about reactive language and proactive language for you as a teacher in your private school. And reactive language would be, well, that's just the type of teacher that I am. That's just how I am. That's the way I do things. But proactive language would be that I can try a different approach. I can choose to do something different. I could try something different. That student makes me so angry. But proactive language is that I am in control of my own feelings. It isn't the child that makes me angry. I'm in control of my feelings. I don't have the time to do this, and that's probably a very true statement. We know that in private school education, we wear a lot of hats and a full plate, and then there's always more things added to that plate. But if there's something that really, really needs to be done and it benefits the child, then this is a priority to me and I will make the time to do this. Easier said than done, I realize. But I want to talk for a moment about growth mindset versus fixed mindset. We have in our, Carol Dweck from Stanford University did research that in our minds, we choose how we approach learning. And the way that we feel about how we learn, the way that we feel about making mistakes, the way we feel about how difficult it is, how much of a struggle it is to do the thing that we're trying to learn, then some of that will dictate whether it is that we display a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. I can't control what happens, but I can control how I react to it. So a fixed mindset would be, well, that's just the way it is. These kids misbehave. The parents are all, the parents are all trying to tell us how to do our jobs. It's just the way it is. But with a growth mindset, you take responsibility for the way that it is, and then you decide, what am I going to do about it? Because complaining equals less effort. So if you get into your mind, if I get into my mind that I'm going to complain about this, I'm going to complain about that, the schedule, and my room is too hot or it's too cold, or there's too many students in my class, or if we just make excuses and we complain and complain, then we put forth less effort, and then the ones who suffer are the students. And so I just wanted to think about how can you be proactive? Let's turn it into an action item before we move on to habit number 2. If it's near the first day of school that you're watching this, if it's preschool, the August in-service, maybe it's being very proactive on the first day of school with rehearsing procedures instead of jumping right into the curriculum, and really taking the time to rehearse those procedures until they become routines, and then that will pay back many dividends over the course of the school year. Maybe it's being proactive with communication. Be like, well, that's just the way it is, and that's just the way I am. I don't deal with the parents. I'm not going to be proactive. I'm not going to send that email. Well, who suffers with that mindset? It's the child that suffers. And also choose to act and not react in the classroom. I really think that every teacher should have a pause button. And we know that now we can pause live TV, but most of us remember when we would pause the DVD player or the VCR. We need a pause button when that child is getting on our last nerve, and we really, really need to take a break, take a moment. We don't get breaks, but to take that moment. So habit number 1 is be proactive, and we can choose our response. Between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space lies our power, because we can choose how we react in that situation. Habit number 2 is to begin with the end in mind. So as you can see, this is Alice from Alice in Wonderland. And one day Alice was walking along, and she says to Cheshire Cat, "Would you tell me, please, which way I ought go from here?" And Cat says, "That depends a good deal on where you want to get to." And Alice said, "I don't much care where." And Cat says, "Then it doesn't matter which way you go." So we know that with our Apple Maps, with Google Maps, that the most important thing when you're using GPS is that it shows you where you are, but it's just blinking, or that little blue dot. Unless you enter on that little white rectangle, unless you enter destination, you're not going to get anywhere. And so I believe that working in a private school is one of the most difficult jobs on earth. Private school teachers, as I said before, you wear so many hats and you have so many responsibilities. And so how can we possibly be successful beginning with the end in mind? What does that mean? What does that look like? Well, I'll get to that in a second, but I want to just encourage you to do something that I've found incredibly helpful over the years. And you'll notice here on my messy to-do list at the top, it says throwing starfish. And I write that on the top of my task list every single day. And I want to tell you why. So one day, a boy was standing on the beach, and he was throwing something into the ocean. And there was a man that was walking along, and he was kind of far off, and he saw this boy. He saw him throwing things. Got closer, and he got closer, and he saw that the boy was throwing starfish into the ocean. And all over the beach, as far as you can see in each direction, there were starfish, and this boy throwing starfish one after the next into the ocean. And so the man walks up to the boy and he says, "What are you doing?" And the boy says, "Well, it's low tide. The sun is coming up. All of these starfish are going to die if I don't throw them back into the ocean." And he throws another starfish in the ocean. And the old man looks to the right and looks to the left, and he says, "There's thousands of starfish as far as I can see in either direction. How could you possibly make a difference?" And the boy listened politely, and then he bent over and he picked up a starfish and he threw it into the ocean. And he looked at the man and he said, "I made a difference to that one." And so that is my compelling reason why over 30 years as a private school leader, head of school, and now as a division head, that's my compelling reason why I do what I do, is throwing starfish. And I know you get the analogy. You've probably heard the starfish story before. Maybe that starfish is a 6th grader who's sitting alone at the lunch table. Maybe that starfish is a parent who's really upset in carpool, and you know, or you heard that that mom in carpool that her mother just had some pretty serious surgery. Maybe that starfish is a first grader who is so frustrated because he can't make his letters, or just can't seem to write that sentence. And so that compelling why, there is no principal, no paycheck, no parent that is going to be a strong enough reason for you to do the hard things that you need to do to be a private school teacher. There's no principal, no paycheck, no parent that will be a compelling enough reason for you to do the hard emotional work that you do in your private school every single day. And so you have to have a compelling reason why you're doing what you do. Begin with the end in mind. And so what does that look like for you? Well, it could be that you're beginning and you're thinking about the last day of school, and you're beginning with the end in mind, and you stop and you think, if I were to sit at my desk on the last day of school and reflect on this school year, what would be the three, and it's a fantastic school year, best school year ever for you. What would be three things that would happen during that school year? And then you reverse it, you reverse engineer it. Maybe it's just the semester, or the 9 weeks, or the trimester, or maybe it's just today. Maybe it's just getting to 3:30 p.m. on a particular school day. But you have to visualize what you want and then work backwards. When you think about your students and you think about the end of the school year, or the end of the lesson, or the end of the semester, what do they know? What can they do? How do they behave? What is their level of enthusiasm? What's your energy level? How are you feeling? We haven't talked about you yet. We're going to get to that. That's the most important part of this webinar, is how you're doing. But beginning with the end in mind has to do with your students, prioritizing them, having something that's actionable, and then making a plan and working the plan. Habit number 3, put first things first. I'm going to guess that some of you recognize this this analogy that I'm about to quickly make, based on the picture on your screen. And one day, college professor, freshman year, lecture hall full of freshmen, pulls out a big jar, sticks about 6 or 7 big rocks in it. They come up to the top of the big jar. And he asks the class, is the jar full? Raise your hand if you think the jar is full. And so some hands go up. He doesn't say anything. He pulls out a little bucket that has little pebbles. And he dumps the pebbles in around the big rocks and kind of picks up and moves around the jar with the big rocks in it until the pebbles come all the way to the top of the rim of the jar. And then he asks the class, raise your hand if you think the jar is full. More students raise their hand. And then he pulls out another little container, and it has sand in it. And he dumps some sand in, and then he pounds it. Dumps some sand in, pounds it. And the sand works its way in all around the little pebbles and come all the way up to the top of the rim of the jar. And then he asks the class, raise your hand if you think the jar is full. And almost everyone at this point raises their hand. And then he pulls out a pitcher of water and starts pouring, and the sand absorbs the water. And he keeps pouring until the jar overflows. And now the jar is full. And he turns to the class and he said, okay, what's the lesson? And the eager freshmen, they raise their hand and say, well, if we pack everything in with our sports and our academics and our social life to freshman year, we can have a really great year and we can get everything done if we're just organized. And he said, no, the big lesson is that you need to put the big rocks in first. Put first things first, because you get it. If the sand and the pebbles and the water were in there first, there's no way those big rocks go in. And so for you, for me, what are our big rocks? And there's a difference between what we say our big rocks are and what we actually maybe do when it comes to our real big rocks. And so the key is to not prioritize what is on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities. And I think it's a crisis in our country that we do what's urgent and we neglect what's important. And so these big rocks, what are they for you? Are they physical health? Are they mental health? Family? Your career, your job at the school is in there too. Church? Finances? But then we have to stop and think, well, am I really putting forth the effort and the energy and the self-discipline in making sure that those big rocks get the attention that they need? That's very difficult when you work at a private school. That quote on the screen says the first casualty of a chaotic day is empathy. When you're going back to that analogy that I gave before, that scenario of Friday afternoon and it's nice weather and the kids are all wound up, if there's some chaos, it's hard to be empathic to that child that needs a little bit of attention. But why am I bringing up this crisis in our country where all this noise and just the urgency of everything and neglecting what's really important? It's because private school teachers are really, really good at putting themselves last on the list. And that's not going to keep you in one piece. It's not going to help you get to the end of the school year in good shape physically and mentally. It is something that we need to think about as far as what is our classroom application for putting first things first. Well, physical health, sleep, your state of mind, your relationship with family and friends. I would say that sleep is probably one of the most important things that we know is important, but that we don't prioritize that we need to do. And also, of course, just movement. I don't like to use the word exercise because some people that don't regularly exercise cringe when they hear that, but just to move, even if it's walking, even if it's taking the stairs instead of the elevator. But what else does it mean as far as putting first things first? Of course, your students are your priority, but what does that mean? What does that actually look like when you say your students are your priority and that you're putting them first? Being intentional with your empathy. And that isn't just reserved for the students, it's for the parents, it's for your coworkers, it's for your head of school, it's for everyone that you interact with at the school, and of course it's for your family. It's setting boundaries. The smartphone, while it's a wonderful thing because it can, in the palm of our hand, we can pretty much find any fact, anything that we need to know in the whole world, but it also keeps us connected when we really, really need to disconnect. And also just the responding to a parent email. I'll just give one more quick example, putting first things first. It comes in at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Are you going to prioritize leaving when you planned to leave? Or are you going to sit there and compose that email and get all upset and then send it and then wonder what's going to happen? And so it's just that the idea of boundaries and of being kind to yourself. So that was habit number 3, put first things first. Habit number 4 is think win-win. We're going to hit this one pretty quickly, but think win-win. This is my daughter Danielle, who's now in her late 20s. And when she was little, whenever we would play a game, she would say, "I will be the winner and you will be the loser." That's what she would say whenever we would start a game. Not sure where that came from, but I guess her mother and I are also pretty competitive. But where we're going with this as far as think win-win is that life is not a zero-sum game. For you to win, someone else does not have to lose. And life is an interdependent reality, not an independent reality. So let me explain what I mean by that. First of all, zero-sum game. Let's think about it in terms of parent-teacher conferences. So I know that when it comes to interacting with parents, that sometimes it feels like that there has to be a winner and there has to be a loser, and that I'm not going to let the parent get the better of me. I will interrupt when they are incorrect about something that they said, the way that their child described that thing that happened at school. And there doesn't have to be a winner and a loser when it comes to parent conversations. There doesn't have to be a winner and a loser when it comes to your interaction with a student who's getting on your last nerve. What I'm getting at here is that if we think win-win, what are the ways that we can benefit, both benefit, but most importantly, again, to prioritize that child. And while that conversation might be awkward, while that conversation might take some courage, and it might take a little more patience and empathy than what we feel like giving, we have to prioritize the child. And it's an interdependent reality and not an independent reality. I feel like in private school education that private school teachers often try to become a lone wolf, the rugged individualist that's just going to do it themselves and go into their silo and they'll just figure it out. And that's just a terrible idea, because what you do is emotional work. It's very hard, it's very draining, it's exhausting, and unless you depend on your colleagues, on your family, it's an interdependent reality in order to get you from point A to point B. And so what does that look like at school? Just a couple of ideas. Maybe it's a professional learning community. Maybe it's a staff meeting in your department, let's say a middle school staff meeting where you're sincerely asking for some tips on how do you work successfully with this particular kid. They're driving me nuts with with their behavior. It also might be that we need to recognize that there's some mutual distrust between parents and teachers, and that a win-win, as I said before, with a parent-teacher conversation, whether it's on the phone or on Zoom or in person or at parent-teacher conferences, that just a reminder that for you to win, the parent does not need to lose. We want to look for ways for the child to win. Also, an intentional effort to improve our interpersonal skills with our colleagues can be a win-win. So like I said, especially after the last couple of years with the COVID pandemic, when we all retreated into our masks and into our distance from other people, into our little cohorts, that it kind of became easy to stay in that mindset of not being connected. And then last two things would be never give into a power struggle with a student. Always look for that win-win outcome. And then move the child's thinking from me to we. I know that many of you really focus on building a culture in your classroom, whether it's a homeroom or a particular class or a team, but moving that mindset from me to we. We have a lot of young people today. I'm not painting with a broad brush, but some young people, they're pretty self-focused, and it kind of doesn't matter how they got there, but that child is in our class. And so what is our responsibility? Is it to just complain about that child and they're spoiled and they're this and they're that? Or is it to help them learn and to move from me to we? And so habit number 4 is think win-win. Habit number 5, seek first to understand, then to be understood. So I really believe that we have a listening crisis in our country. And I believe that all you have to do is drive down the main road, the main 2-lane or 4-lane road in your community, and you're going to see all kinds of blinking electronic signs. The music that's coming into your earbuds from a podcast or from music, the television, the smartphone, just so many distractions. And so listening has become a rare commodity in our culture for all of the reasons that I just stated. But I didn't even mention the white noise of legitimate things that have nothing to do with the media or advertising, and that's church and family and job and getting your kids to the places they need to be for their activities and all of the things that happen that are legitimate in our lives that become white noise or become distractions. And so if we really want to listen, if we really want to listen to that child or to that parent, and we want to first seek to understand, then to be understood, couple of tips. First of all, listening with the intent to reply is not really listening, because the brain cannot effectively do more than one thing at a time. And so you are going to be thinking about what you're going to say and not really be listening. The best gift that you can give is to be present. So I want you to think about that for just a quick second. Your device, the active listening body language, the empathic listening, the honest feedback. And boy, that's a tough one in private schools, isn't it? We just, we don't say the things sometimes that we really need to say because we are concerned about how that's going to come back or how the parent might react, or if they're really going to accept that about the behavior, or about the academic deficiency, or whatever it might be. But if we're holding back, then the child is the one that's suffering. And I just think that I was thinking about a situation that happened a few years ago where this mom was upset about something that happened in a class, and she wanted to meet with me, and she was coming in, and I could tell that she was all fired up. And I was just ready to respond in a certain way. But just before she came at the end of the school day, I heard that they had to put their dog down that afternoon that was like 12 or 13 years old. And so that perspective, that empathy, that knowledge changed the way that I reacted in that situation. And so seek first to understand and then to be understood. Not only does that go for the parents, it goes for the kids as well. And so the kids know that we genuinely care for them, and they have really good they can in authenticity is something that kids can sniff out from 100 miles away. They know what's genuine and they know what's not. And so kids can tell if we're going through the motions, or if we really genuinely really care, and our actions and our words show that. And as I said before, part of seeking first to understand and then to be understood requires that courage to give that honest feedback as well. All right, 2 more. Habit number 6 is synergize. So we know that the whole is often greater than the sum of its parts. And I wanted to tell you a quick story about, depending on where you live, your county fair might have tractor pulls, truck pulls. Well, some parts of the country, they do it the old-fashioned way, and they have horse pulls, and they pull sleds with a tremendous amount of weight behind it. And so many years ago, there were 2 guys at one of these fairs, and one horse pulled 6,000 pounds, and another horse number 2, pulled 7,000 pounds. And so they're talking, and they're like, well, if we put our horses together, like you see in this picture, wonder what they would be able to pull. And so 6,000 pounds, 7,000 pounds, I don't know, 13,000, 15,000 pounds. They put the 2 horses together and they pulled 22,000 pounds. And the idea is that we can always get more done together than we can by ourselves. Synergize means to work as a team and to bring that team together. And this is one of my favorite quotes from Tenzing Norgay. He's a Sherpa that worked with Sir Edmund Hillary, and they were the first people to climb Mount Everest. And he said, you do not climb a mountain like Everest by trying to race ahead on your own or by competing with your comrades. You do it slowly and carefully by unselfish teamwork, for that is the mountain way. So the mountain way means that there were over 450 people that were involved in getting Hillary and Norgay to the top of Mount Everest. And it started with the porters 100 miles away that would carry 70-pound packs on their back and walk over footbridges over rivers to get everything to the base of Everest. And then other climbers who would take those supplies up to the base camp and then the next camp and then the high altitude camp. And there were 3 pairs of experienced climber with a Sherpa, and it just so happened that when the conditions were perfect, that it happened to be their turn. And so the ones who went and tried to climb Mount Everest as rugged individualists and just go all out, you can read those stories because almost all of them, their bodies are still on that mountain because they died on Everest. And like you said, you don't climb Everest by just racing ahead. You have to do it in an unselfish, slow, careful way together, and that is the mountain way. And so what does that look like for you at school? To synergize, to have synergy with your team? Well, I want you to think about your colleagues, and I want you to think about positive comments. There was some research done recently where they gave tasks to these different teams, and then they watched the teams and assessed the interactions that they had, and then looked at some of the results, not only of the way they interacted, but whether they were successful or not with the task. And the most effective teams in their interactions had 6 positive comments for every 1 negative comment. And the least effective teams had 1 positive comment for every 3 negative comments. So again, 6 positive comments for every 1 negative, or 1 positive comment for every 3 negative. We know that what we say, our words have power, and that when we come with the right attitude to a team situation, and we don't worry about who gets the credit, we just worry about putting the kids first and solving that problem. Maybe it's something comes up at recess or in the carpool lane, or with something that's going on with a particular student. And if we put our heads together and we discuss it and come up with a plan and then tweak it and work hard to implement it, then that's synergy. And that is what we're striving to do in our private schools. So we've gotten all the way to habit number 7, which is the most important habit of all. And that is habit number 7, sharpen the saw. And so pretty sure you know this analogy, you know this story. But one day there was a man in the woods. He's cutting down trees. He's very frustrated. And a man comes along, and this guy is cutting, and he's sawing and he's sawing, and he's so frustrated. And he said, the man comes along and looks at the man with the saw, and he says, why are you so frustrated? And he says, I can't, my saw is so dull, I can't cut these trees down. I have to work so hard, and I'm so tired. And so the man says, well, why don't you just take time to sharpen your saw? And he says, I don't have enough time, I'm too busy. So here's the problem. Being busy all the time has become a cultural expectation, especially in the United States, in North America. Is like somehow, unless you're always hustling, always busy, work, and then you're running to the activity, and then you have the thing going on in the evening, that somehow we're like lazy or we're slackers if we're not ridiculously overscheduled and super busy. But the greatest asset in your life is you. It's not your house, it's not your car, it's not your other material possessions. The greatest asset in your life is you. But we often don't treat it that way, because we sometimes treat strangers better than we treat ourselves, and we sometimes, a lot of the time, treat our pets or other inanimate objects in our homes with more care and concern and respect than we would treat ourselves. And Douglas MacArthur said the amount of busy work will always expand to fill the amount of free time available. And that means you're never ever going to have it all done. We're never ever going to be all caught up. And so we just need to accept, not in a defeatist way, but in a way of just being real, that we have to take care of ourselves, or this is never going to, it's not going to work. And so there are 4 areas that I want to talk about for just a moment. And as you look about that, as you look at that, I want you to think about the last time that you were on an airplane, and you know that the flight attendant was demonstrating the emergency procedures and said that if there's a loss of cabin pressure, that an oxygen mask will drop down, and that if you're seated next to a child or an elderly person that's struggling, put your own oxygen mask on first and then assist the person next to you. You've heard that every time that you've been on an airplane, you've heard that. But here's the problem. As human beings, especially as private school teachers, we don't do that. We put our oxygen mask on last, or sometimes we don't put it on at all. So the physical health, the nutrition, the exercise, the stress management, the sleep, the social emotional, and just the feeling emotionally safe and not feeling like you're in a toxic situation in a relationship, for example. The spiritual, whether it's church or reading the Bible or the Torah or some sort of meditation and inspirational materials. And then your intellectual or mental stimulation, reading and planning and writing. Teachers are highly educated, highly skilled, highly experienced, and we need our brains to be stimulated. And there are some things that are diversions and distractions. I've scrolled and scrolled and scrolled on social media as well, but that doesn't stimulate us intellectually. And so what do we do? How do we recharge and refresh and refill ourselves? You can't pour from an empty cup. And if what's you're giving to those kids at your school every day is more than what you're getting filled up with, what you're getting back from your job, then you're at a deficit, and a deficit is going to lead to burnout and going to lead to mental health problems and physical problems. And so my plea, my big ask for you is to just pick one of these areas and decide that you're going to start focusing on putting your own oxygen mask on first. And I can hear what you're saying. You're like, yeah, right. I don't have time. I've got this job. I'm working at this school. It's super busy. And then I've got kids and all the rest. I get it. But I also want you to think about, what is the alternative? It's you deciding that you're going to prioritize your own self-care in just one area for now. And then you're going to just stack some days where you take 10 minutes, 15 minutes to do something for you. Sleep, mindfulness, time with family and friends, exercise, reading. Remember that activity is not progress. Just because you're doing something, it doesn't mean that you're making progress. Because work is like water. Working at a private school, it's like water. In a flood, or the water just fills in everywhere. There's, like I said, you're never going to have it all done. You're never going to have it all together. And so just be intentional. Schedule time in your day, 15 minutes a day, and then treat that appointment with yourself as if it was a doctor's appointment that took you 6 months to get. Those doctor's appointments that are really hard to get, we don't miss those. We somehow find a way to get to those. 15 minutes a day, stimulate your brain, do something to reduce your stress, move your body, eat something nutritious, whatever it might be. But put that oxygen mask on first. And when we're talking about stimulating your brain, I didn't know this, but there are over 6,000 TED Talks that are less than 6 minutes long. And I just say that because, we make excuses. I don't have time. But that's something that while you're eating your sandwich or whatever for lunch, that just gets that intellectual stimulation. And that's just one quick example. There's other examples in your guided notes and other resources for you at the end, but let's wrap it up by remembering what the philosopher Aristotle said. He said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. And so repeatedly, we're going to do these 7 things. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People from Stephen Covey, and we're applying them to you, the 7 habits of highly effective private school educators. First, be proactive. We know that there are proactive people and reactive people. There is a space between stimulus and response, and you are going to choose how you react in that space between stimulus and response. Begin with the end in mind. Figure out your destination, and then work backwards from that. Put first things first. What are your big rocks? What are your big rocks? Decide and then put them in first and make time for them and treat them with priority in your schedule. Think win-win. It's not a zero-sum game. That person does not have to lose, and you don't have to win. Everyone can win. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. We want to remember that there's a listening crisis in our country, and that really listening is rare, and rare things are remembered and appreciated. Synergize with your team and your colleagues, and most importantly, sharpen the saw and take care of yourself and be kind to yourself. So I wish you the best of luck with your school year, but most importantly, my wish for you is that you will take one of these habits and that you will intentionally start to implement these changes in your life, and that you will see the difference and you will become a much more effective teacher and a much happier person. Thank you for taking the time to be with me today, and have a great day.